right, the time has arose. Welcome to the subcommittee on capital. My name is Rob Bloxham. I think we've had introductions of the full committee at this time, so we'll go ahead, and we only have two bills on the docket this morning. Would you want to go through the presentations first, Tony, or would you like to go through the bills?
We can do the bills first, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let's do the bills first. We're going to turn it over to Tony to present the chairman's bills.
So there are two bills before you. First bill is House Bill 165. This is the 9C bond bill. It's kind of a routine bill. You get one every year. It's about $100.9 million of 9C bonds. These bonds are typically for things like dorms and dining. So the non-general fund revenues have been certified by the governor that they're sufficient. They don't impact general fund. There's no debt impact on them. And basically, again, it's just that they're in the budget. It's just something that you do on a routine basis each year.
Thank you, Tony. Anyone to speak in favor of this bill or against it? Work on motions.
Move to report. Second.
The bill HB 165 has been properly put forward and seconded. All in favor? Well, let's vote on the voting board, please. Yeah, vote and somewhere. Delegate Austin? Delegate Austin votes A. Bill report 7-0. All right, Tony, next bill?
The next bill, Mr. Chairman, is House Bill 166. This is the capital outlay plan bill. Again, this is a typical bill that will come before you. There are some amendments to the bill, but before I do that, just point out what this bill does is it provides, for lack of a better term, the universe of projects that you can consider going forward. So these are projects at this point that are not funded or might just be in the planning phase, and you might consider them as you're going forward for full funding, but there's no fiscal impact to the bill itself. Again, there are 5 line amendments, just to point them out what they are. The first is a purely technical correction. It was a typo on line 62, which changes the $100 million $1 to $100 million. The second amendment is to delete a project at the request of the community colleges. The project is contained on lines 103 through 105. The community college has requested that the project be removed. The third is it inserts, there are 3 projects that were left off the list. So it inserts a project at UVA Wise on line 83, which is a technology classroom building project. It then also, the second project that gets inserted is in the community colleges is a project at Mountain Empire Community College for a workforce development building. And then lastly, it inserts a project for Christopher Newport, which is not on the list, for a new E&G administrative building. So you'd have to adopt the line amendments first, Mr. Chairman, and then see what you want to do with the bill.
Thank you, Tony.
Mr. Chairman, I move the line amendments in a block.
The line amendments have been seconded, so we're going to move in a block, the line amendments.
No, you can put them on the board.
Yep. To accept the amendments is just voice vote. I'm sorry, no, just voice vote. All in favor of the line amendments? Aye. All opposed? Okay, line amendments are approved. So now we have the bill laying in front of us with them as amended. Been properly moved and seconded for House Bill 166 with amendments. Delegate Austin? Yes. Delegate Austin votes aye. Bill reports 8-0. All right, that concludes the docket for that, but do we have anything else this morning, Tony? Andrew? Yes, please. We have a short presentation.
Don't pull the. All right, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee. I'm grateful to be here this morning. Just going to do an overview of the capital outlay and general government areas, as well as what was included in HB 29 and 30 that will be coming before you this session. So starting with capital outlay, I'm just going to quickly go over the debt capacity process, the capital process, and then we'll go through what is in HB 29 and HB 30. So starting with debt capacity, just some quick overview, you will see that I do want to point out first that neither HB 29 or HB 30 has any additional VCBA or VPBA debt. So starting from the very beginning, there's not a lot of debt this session as proposed in the bills, but do want to go over some of these foundational basics as part of capital outlay. So Virginia Constitution authorizes 4 types of debt. The first 3 are backed by the full faith and credit of the Commonwealth, and this is what earns them the AAA bond rating. The first is emergency debt. In my knowledge, I don't believe we've ever used this. I think COVID was the closest we've gotten to being eligible to use it, and thankfully still did not have to. The second are general obligation bonds, GOB. You know these as the ones that require a voting referendum. I believe the last time we did the 9B debt was in 2002, so it's been a while. These projects has to go out on a voter referendum with specific projects itemized. And finally, 9C are revenue bonds. These are examples include higher ed, dormitories, dining halls. They require 2/3 vote by the General Assembly, and the governor has to certify that revenues are available to pay back the debt. Finally, Section 9D debt is also authorized by the Constitution, but these are not backed by the full faith and credit of the Commonwealth. So they are rated AA, but in recent years, the AA interest rate has been very similar to AAA negative, so it's been to our advantage to use these bonds. These are repaid from both general fund and non-general fund sources, including auxiliary enterprises and local government revenues. And again, the vast majority of this you're used to seeing as Virginia College Building Authority or Virginia Public Building Authority debt. But there also is debt issued by the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and it's cut off on the bottom of the screen there, but Virginia Housing Development Authority, Virginia Port Authority, there's some other examples. So when you talk about debt limitations, those first 3 that are backed by the full faith and credit of the Commonwealth that I spoke about, those are limited specifically by the Constitution. For 9B, that's the GOB voter referendum debt, these cannot surpass 115% of average annual income sales and sales tax for the previous 3 years. They must mature at 30 years or the length of the useful project, and the debt payments are structured with level principal. For 9C, like the 9B debt, it must also stay within 115% of average annual income and sales tax revenues of the last 3 years. Finally, 9D, that's the one that is not backed by the full faith and credit of the Commonwealth. There technically is no limitations placed on that by the Virginia Constitution. So let's talk a little bit about the policy that we have as a Commonwealth for our debt. What we followed today was formed nearly 30 years ago. Starting in 1990, the Appropriation Act required a plan to coordinate borrowing. In 1991, an executive order established the Debt Capacity Advisory Committee, or DCAC, some call it DCAC. And then it was established first by executive order and then statutorily defined later in 1994. All 3 of the bond rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, all point to our having the DCAC as a positive debt management practice. The DCAC set the policy at the time of limiting tax-supported debt to 5% of all revenues. And in that case, debt service payments made or ultimately pledged to be made from the general fund. So a little bit about the Debt Advisory Committee. It's comprised of the folks you see up there: Secretary of Finance, State Treasurer, DPB Director, Auditor of Public Accounts, JLARC Director, State Comptroller, staff directors of House Appropriations and Senate Finance and Appropriations Committees, and then 2 citizen members appointed by the governor. They meet annually, usually in December, and they review the state's tax-supported debt portfolio, as well as submit an advisory estimate of the maximum new tax-supported debt that the Commonwealth could reasonably and prudently authorize for the upcoming biennium. The DCAC model considers several things in making its recommendations. Ultimately, what it comes up with is based on a 10-year horizon of blended revenues whereby the total tax-supported debt is less than 5%. A little bit of detail on that. It includes actual debt service on all issued tax-supported debt. That includes capital leases and regional jail costs. And it includes authorized but not yet issued projects. So those are the projects that, say, over the last few biennium, we've authorized to go to construction, but for whatever reason, the agency is not yet at that point of the project. So it's technically counted because they could go any day. They've been authorized to go, but they have not yet done so. That's important for you to know because it's just a reminder that just because we approve a project, you approve a project to go to construction, they don't do so immediately, so that IOU kind of stays on the table until the bonds are issued to pay for those costs. Additional assumptions included in here is a 20-year bonds with level debt service, except for those 9B GOB voter referendum bonds, which assume level principal. Also a concept of blended revenues, where it includes general fund, state revenues, and the transportation trust fund, not including highway maintenance and operating funds, federal grants, or toll revenues, and ABC profit transfers. This is all quite technical, so please do let me know if you have any questions. So when we talk about where we are today, as of December 2021, just last month, our total portfolio of tax-supported debt is about $13 billion. As you can see on the pie chart, 2/3 of what's outstanding is what I talked about before, where VCBA and VPBA are the big chunk kind of what we have out there. Second most is transportation at roughly a quarter, and then 9C revenue bonds. Recall these are mostly auxiliary projects. And finally, the remaining GOB debt is tax supported. And again, when we say tax supported, what we mean is it is either directly paid from the general fund or ultimately pledged to be paid from the general fund. So when you talk about these auxiliary projects with revenue coming from the institution, if in the event the revenue does not materialize, those projects would ultimately be backed by the general fund. All right, debt authorized but not issued, this is what I was just talking about, is included in the model, where as of last month, we have about 5 million of projects that fall into this category. Again, you see the same proportion trajectory. You have VCBA and VPPA with the vast majority, followed by the same proportion in transportation and then other projects. So again, these are projects that have been authorized to go to construction or to purchase equipment but have not yet done so. So the model results, this last December, using the current revenue forecast, assuming tax-supported debt service remains less than 5% in blended revenues, debt capacity is expressed in terms of a 10-year average, so over a 10-year average. It normalizes those spikes that you have if a bunch go out at one time. And again, it incorporates those 5 billion in projects authorized but not yet issued. And it assumes an interest rate of 2.42, which I do want to point out because in recent years it's been a little bit above 3. So right now the model shows that we have roughly 1.1 billion per year for the next 10 years in debt capacity to remain within that 5% over a 10-year horizon. One thing I want to mention before moving on from that, while we do have more capacity than we've had in recent years, in its December report, the DCAC did note that as compared to other AAA bond-rated states, we do tend to have more debt per capita. So while we have greater capacity, it appears than usual, we do tend to issue historically debt at a level higher than our similarly AAA bond-rated states. All right, before I move to the process, were there any questions?
Yes, sir. Good.
I just wanted to follow up on that very last point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The why is it that we have a little bit higher than our neighboring states on the debt level per capita?
That is a great question. I don't mean to call you out. I saw I had a friend from Treasury here earlier. He stepped away, so let me get back with you on that, if I may, sir.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think in recent years, there are a couple of factors. One, obviously the availability of the bonds, and the rates were so low that, I mean, you're buying an asset that you're going to keep for, in some cases, more than 50 years. So paying for it using debt is probably was considered a good business practice. And then the second part was, there was also, you all passed, I think, 2 significant transportation bills in the last decade or so, and that also. So combination of a couple of things, you know, increased construction, obviously, with the colleges, but mainly it was the debts, the interest rate itself was very, very competitive.
Thank you, Tony. Any other questions? All right.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. All right, now a bit about the process. So the 2008 changes were made to the capital process that are still used today. In 2008, Chapter 1 established the 6-year capital outlay plan, and this is what you voted on before my presentation. This is an annual bill, and what it does is it amends the prior year 6-year plan. There are no appropriations tied to it. It just sets out, here's what our Commonwealth has said that we are our priorities for the next wave of capital projects. The governor submits it every year for General Assembly consideration, and then you speak to it as you did earlier. It also established the 6-year Capital Improvement Plan Advisory Committee. You might hear it called the CAP 6 or 6-pack, or this includes the Secretary of Finance and the directors of DPB, SHEV, DGS, and staff directors of House Appropriations and Senate Finance. This group is tasked with recommending projects to include in the plan and meets throughout the year to deal with any administrative issues that come up in between. In addition to establishing those, the 2008 established the concept of kind of a permanent project planning. And so within a biennium, projects are designated for planning, either pre-planning or planning up to preliminary drawings. And the intent of this is to gather more information about the project before you put in the full construction funding. So hypothetically, a project would go through planning, and then you'd stop, and then it comes here. You all decide if you still agree with the scope and cost and concept of the project once you have plans further developed. And then if it's agreed upon by the General Assembly that that's still something you want to do at that cost and scope, that at that point, construction funding is provided and authorized. So this is a helpful way of both tempering the flow of projects and cash, as well as ensuring that you all are voting on and making decisions on projects that are much closer to what the final thing would look like. Oh, and one last thought on that one I wanted to bring up. In many cases, agencies, specifically higher ed, will use their own money, or they'll use non-general fund to forward the planning process. And then once that project, and if that project is approved for construction, those non-general funds are reimbursed. All right, agency roles. This process, the changes made in 2008 really heightened the roles of both DGS and SHEV in this process. DGS not only serves on the 6-pack, but they also provide a very helpful, very detailed review. They do a cost review, and they review the plans to a very tedious level. Having worked there before, I can speak to that. So they provide a lot of value along the way, giving us a professional insight into current market conditions and to the appropriate design level for every project that comes through here. And then SHEV also sits on the 6-pack, and they review projects for programmatic and space justification for higher ed. All right, now we're going to I'm going to go through some of the proposals for capital outlay in both of the bills. Were there any other questions on process before I move ahead to what is before you? All right. So not a lot is in the caboose bill, just a few things I want to point out. There's about $211.5 million general fund proposed. The vast majority of that is for 2 pools that provide supplemental funding. The first is $100 million to supplement previously authorized projects. When I just spoke about the DGS cost review, what happens is they're put in a pool, and then DGS provides, as you move along the planning, they provide a much more detailed estimate. So you go back in and you shift the estimate you started with in the project pool to adjust it to much more refined once you have a better idea of the plans as they move along. So as that happens, sometimes the costs go up, so we provide supplemental funding for prior approved capital pools. And then there's also an $80 million amendment in the proposed bill for material cost volatility, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. You all are very well aware of supply chain issues and labor concerns, and this has to do with that. And then about $21 million to supplement workforce development projects, and then I'd say about $15 million for additional specific projects set out on there. And that includes the $6.1 million in non-general fund. All right, HB 30 has a lot more in it than 29, so we'll go through this now. There's funding for 124 separate projects in HB 30. This includes both specific projects for a singular purpose as well as umbrella projects that have a whole bunch of smaller sub-projects underneath them, but that all go towards the same purpose. So general fund comprises 2/3 of the total cost of what's in HB 30. And again, want to reiterate, there is no VCBA or VPBA debt recommended or proposed. How these projects break down, the vast majority, 80% of it, is for construction and existing facility improvements. And again, the breakdown is about 70% general fund, 30% non-general fund. Just going to give you a second if you want to look through the table. All right, I'll go through each of those categories on their own now. So for planning, there's almost $80 million in general fund and $30 million in non-general fund for planning. The vast majority, again, of the general fund, $76.3 million, is in a central pool. That's supplemented by $1.5 million non-general fund. So that's 21 projects. And then there are 6 projects that are standalone with non-general fund. I want to point out that the projects for which these planning dollars are provided, specifically the pool project, the $76.3 million general, that would equal about $2 billion in additional capital projects as they would move through. Going back to construction and improvements, this is the vast majority of what's in HB 30. There's $2 billion general fund and almost $1 billion non-general fund over the biennium. There's 81 new projects total, and they're allocated in several different ways. There's 55 standalone projects. These are for both higher education and state agency. Then there's 2 large construction pools, again, one for higher ed and one for state agencies. There's also a $100 million deposit to the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, and in addition to the general fund, there's $157.3 million in non-general fund supported 9C and 9D bonds. For supplements and equipment, there's $120 million general fund over the biennium to supplement previously approved projects. This is similar in concept to what is in HB 29. This $100 million, though, is for pools that are more recent, and so those costs are still being worked out. There's also $20.4 million to supplement existing specific projects at the Library of Virginia and Virginia State University. And finally, there's $31 million in general fund for a central pool for equipment for previously approved projects that near completion. It's kind of our process where as a project starts, we remove any costs for what we call FF&E, furnitures and equipment, and we put that back in when you get towards the end of the project, just because those costs can be separated in that way. So move ahead to maintenance reserve. All right, this budget, as proposed, includes $354 million general fund and a small non-general fund component in addition for maintenance reserve. These are projects for existing facilities, and they're limited in scope to what these dollars can be used for. The priority has to be roofs, but it's also like HVAC, plumbing improvements, electrical, very much so keeping the facilities that you have in good operating shape. So the amounts in the HB 30 represent a $75 million increase over the current biennial levels. And the HB 30 also proposes a new methodology to calculate maintenance reserve allocations. It's using technical information provided by institutions on the age and condition of their facilities. And we would note that this calculation does result in a measurable change to a few institutions, to more than a few institutions, just because you're changing the basis upon which the allocation is made. All right. So let me just end with capital outlay and just a few thoughts. I did mention the cost escalation concerns. A lot of the project costs coming through now are impacted by some of the labor and supply challenges. And then we also have, just want to note that the capital outlay process we spoke about in 2008, that started in 2008, where you have projects that are put in for planning, they go through planning, they come back for a cost, and at that point you all consider them for construction. There are some actions in HB 30 that do not follow that process ideally, and so I want to bring that to your attention. And then finally, just thinking about over time the typical use of general fund for capital as opposed to debt capacity to support construction projects. So that's the end of capital. Before I move to general government, yes, sir.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Before we move to the next section.
Of course. And before I move to general government too, want to also acknowledge that both Tony and I handle capital together. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come to either of us. And I want to take a minute to publicly thank him for all he's done to bring me on board and understand capital outlay better. All right, general government. So same thing with capital. I'm going to do a quick overview of what is in general government and then go through what's in the budget for it. So general government is an amalgamation of everything that doesn't fit elsewhere, if you will. So you have the whole legislative branch, the whole judicial branch, you have executive offices, and then within the executive branch, administration, finance, secretariats, and then you have independent agencies. So a tremendous breadth you all will be handling, so please do reach out as things come up if you have questions. So when you're looking at general government as a whole, it's split almost 50-50 non-general fund to general fund. And the largest non-general fund revenue sources come from the internal service funds within VITA and DGS. Internal service funds are monies that are kind of circled around state government when you have an agency that's a central service agency providing benefits to other state agencies. So for example, with VITA, agencies pay a rate for the services they provide, and funding is provided to those paying agencies to then turn around and pay back to VITA. Another huge chunk of your non-general fund resources come from independent agency self-supporting nature. So you have enterprise dollars and lottery and Virginia College Savings Plan, and then you have trust and agency dollars in Virginia Retirement System, et cetera. All right, just a real quick snapshot of kind of the breakout of your budgets in general government. If you start at the upper left in the legislative branch, nearly all general fund. In the bottom right, you have independent agencies that are virtually all non-general fund. Let's see if I had anything specific to point out. All right, so we're going to go over what's in the budget for these. Not a lot in the caboose bill. The Supreme Court has a reversion of $33 million general fund from the criminal fund due to continued pandemic impacts, whereby you've had fewer people in jails and the need to support them or in the court system. The Department of Taxation, you have $0.6 million general fund. This is for administrative costs related to implementing proposed tax policy changes. These are the tax policy changes proposed in HB 30. You'll see this same additional funding request in HB 30 for the same tax policy changes. And then finally, Department of Accounts, no funding provided, but a working capital advance authorization as they put a group together to look at the state cardinal system to see what additional changes they want to make in the future for the financial and human capital management modules. HB 30. The biggest items in here I want to bring to your attention under Comp Board. Targeted salary actions for sworn sheriff's deputies and regional jail staff. What this would do, it would increase the starting salary from, I believe it's around $36,000 now, to $42,000 entry level. It would also provide a compression increase for staff with more than 3 years of state consecutive service. And then another addition in Comp Board is full funding provided for new jail behavioral health care standards. This is about $40 million over the biennium to comply with new standards that were set by the Board of Local and Regional Jails. It's about 500 new positions. For half of these positions, these are already existing. It's the medical and treatment positions. This would fill out the remaining statewide need. And for these positions, the state only pays 2/3, and the local regional jails pay the remaining 1/3. The new behavioral health care managers, that is a new position, and the HB 30 not only provides funding for this, but assumes the state pays the full cost. And finally, for all 500 of these positions, the budget assumes that they are all new positions that would start on July 1st. The next big item for which I presume we will probably receive some bills in this area is for VITA. So the slide is the same that I showed at the full committee, but just run through it again real quick for you. The budget proposes $175 million non-general fund and 71 positions for VITA over the biennium. A reminder that these are supported by fees paid by participating state agency customers, and the payments made for these fees are typically about 45% general fund supported agencies, and the remaining 55% they use their own non-general fund revenue source. This breaks down into what's shown on the chart there. So the majority is just to update their internal service fund for usage projections, but then you do have additional monies provided for enhancing cybersecurity efforts and to improve the service delivery under their new multi-supplier model. So as I pointed out last time, this is just the funding provided just to VITA for cybersecurity. As they shared with us at the full committee last Wednesday, VETA is responsible for the network and the infrastructure and for the policies for all state agencies within the executive branch. But this would strengthen that, but a reminder that there are other places in the budget that cybersecurity was provided for one-off website or specific application costs. All right. Other general government proposals in HB 30. I'll run through these quickly. It's a lot on there. It might be hard to see. So Department of General Services, you have funding provided to expand the capacity for bioinformatics and sequencing, as well as a targeted salary increase for lab scientists. What this means is you're basically augmenting DGS's state consolidated lab services. That's where they provide a lot of the contact tracing type of informatics that comes not only from the pandemic, but also, if you have a lettuce outbreak or something like that, they come back and they do that tracing. So we want to augment that. Department of Human Resources Management, this establishes business intelligence program and creates a capacity for personnel-related support. So what this is going to do, it's going to take all of the state hiring data, make it publicly accessible to state agencies to use for their own HR analytics. Department of Elections, it increases funding for public education and outreach. This includes both the $2.5 million chunk of money as well as a position to support the allocation of it. Comp Board, it provides supplemental career development funding for eligible staff in treasurers, commissioners of revenue, and Commonwealth's attorneys' offices. These are folks who have done the required education or steps taken to be eligible for career development monies and are just waiting for the funding to be provided, and that's what this does. Under executive offices, it provides supplemental funding for the Governor's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to expand language access statewide. It also provides funding to staff the Cannabis Equity Reinvestment Board. And for the Office of the Attorney General, it funds a Consumer Data Protection Unit. And this is in correspondence with the bill that passed and goes into effect in January 2023. For finance, there's money in the budget for both Department of Taxation and Treasury to administer the taxpayer refunds and policy changes included in HB 30. There's also money in the budget that we'll come to this committee for wrongful incarceration compensation claims. There are 3 claims provided in the budget, and we're aware of 3 additional claims for bills that have been filed thus far. For Treasury Board, there's money to increase debt service costs for previous VPBA, VCBA authorizations, and this is the issuance of those bonds. In the judicial branch, district courts, you all provided 120 positions last biennium. This nearly completes the need. I think we have additional maybe 40 positions that remain that need to be addressed for local district court office staff. For magistrates, it funds a targeted salary action plan for these positions that have very high turnover. For the Supreme Court, it increases language interpreter services through use of a contract. This has been found to be the most cost-efficient and effective way to do this. And it also provides funding for oversight of mental health and veterans specialty dockets. So those are the dockets that are handled outside the regular process for the qualifying populations. For the Circuit Court, it restores prior cuts to the technology fund. It's my understanding that these cuts were done roughly after the last recession, and this $900,000 that it restores per year brings that technology fund back to where it was prior to those cuts. It also funds an additional Circuit Court judgeship for Prince William County, and for the State Bar, there's funding in to provide targeted salary actions for legal aid positions at the local level. Finally, independent agencies. The only general fund provided for independent agencies is about $3.9 million general fund each year for the Workers' Compensation Commission for forensic evidence collection and medical care of assault victims. All of their funding increases for independent agencies are non-general fund and use the fund sources that each agency respectively has. So just a few highlights for Virginia Lottery. It's nearly $100 million over the biennium. Their operations and their sales just for Lotto, largely because they had the iLottery offering, but also just lottery has been very popular the last couple years, so increases their operations to support their work there, and another $40.7 million over the biennium for their work for the newly authorized regulation and oversight of both sports betting and casinos. And then for the College Savings Plan, again, this uses their enterprise monies that cannot be used for anything other than what College Savings Plan deems, and it's about $16 million over the biennium for higher education and access and affordability programs. This is a new program they've been doing, and then $7.4 million over the biennium and 22 positions for general operational growth. Finally, general government, there are a few things in central accounts that I just want to bring to your attention because they fall under the purview of the subcommittee. There's monies in the budget for the general fund share. When I spoke earlier about kind of central service agencies or internal service funds, again, these are agencies that provide services to other state agencies, and then they're paid internally within the state. So you have the general fund share of operating system charges for the Cardinal Human Capital Management and Cardinal Finance System, and then performance budgeting system. You have the general fund share of rate changes for those. And then similar under VITA, you have almost $61 million for the general fund share of standard agency rates, as well as $1.8 million for their services provided for IT audits and ISO. In central accounts, you have about $10.8 million to improve language service access across state agencies. You have about $6 million in the second year provided to reimburse localities for presidential primary expenses. These are obviously one-time expenses that we have every 4 years. And then finally, our liability insurance rates have increased statewide, so you have funding in central accounts for the general fund portion of that $4 million for increased rates for all state agencies. And with that, I wrap up summary of, one more. Long-term budget policy and budget issues. These are kind of larger in concept. Just want to make sure they're on your radar. First, IT systems, not only because VITA falls under our purview, but also all of the agencies that fall under the subcommittee purview are responsible for their own unique systems. So just keeping an eye and making sure that they are efficient and effective for our customers. And local government support. This subcommittee, because we have compensation board, you have that kind of age-old, how much do you provide per constitution for these local constitutional officers, state share versus local share. And then finally, our tax system, especially as there's mention of policy changes and refunds, just ensuring the tax department is appropriately staffed, that our policies are fair, and that we are secure from cyber attacks. Now with that, if there are any questions on general government.
Thank you. Delegate Ferris.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I noticed it was in the Virginia lottery, in the higher ed with a college fund, it was 7.4 million for 22 positions. Is that right?
Well, so the positions, they technically have the authority to approve the positions on their own. The 17 million is not tied just to the positions.
It was 7.4 million. 22 positions, so I just figured $336,000 a year. I just wanted to try to apply for one of those jobs.
That is not incorrect math. What they're trying to do is they're trying to look ahead to the future, and all of the funding in there is for operational growth, cybersecurity expenses, and then there's also their desire to grow their maximum employment level or their MEL to a position where they want to be several years from now. So I have asked them what they would need just for the next biennium to address, but there's no direct correlation between those positions. That the dollar amount's kind of an amalgamation of several different things, but good question, sir.
Thank you. Delegate Plum.
Yeah, back to VITA for just a moment.
Yes, sir.
The percentage or some kind of understanding of how much of the executive branch agencies are under VITA as opposed to running your own systems?
Yes, sir. I believe 100% of executive branch agencies are under VITA. Looking back, I'm getting a nod. So yes, 100% of executive branch. Yes, sir.
Are there any more questions from the committee? And I will remind that was the governor's budget that came
Yes, sir.
forward.
Everything I spoke to today was what was in HB 29 or HB 30 as introduced.
And it'll be our pleasure to do what we can to it.
That is your role. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, is that all the business that comes in front of the committee today?
Yes, sir.
Second.